Hey, Carlo, thank you for coming in. You definitely have a extensive background in entrepreneurship, leadership across governments and industries, senior executives, definitely within the United Nations, and very, very successful across every one of those different domains. So just a remarkable history you bring. So thank you for coming in and doing this interview.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very glorious start to the meeting. I don't know if I deserve that much praise, but I am very honored to be on this interview with you because you're the real star and the person that we all look up to in the industry. So thank you for making the time for me.
So, Carlo, you definitely have a superhero background across every domain. And I'm always curious to see, and including my audience, we're always curious to see what were the maybe three inflection points in your life to lead to this wonderful career of contribution and still continuing. And it could have been something that when you were 3 or 5 years old, inside, outside the family, could have been early successes. It could be, mentors that you had. So maybe if you can sort of talk about the top three inflection points.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good question. I and it's all interlinked a little bit with my own personal history. So, when I'm half Ethiopian and half Italian. So that's kind of my heritage, my
Yeah.
background. My dad was an Italian gentleman, and my mother was Ethiopian and Russian, actually, to be precise. And I was born in the great 1969, which was very fun for some. And for our family, it was a little bit different because it was the dawn of real hard times. My mother was part of the Ethiopian imperial family related to the former Emperor Menelik II. And my sister had just married in 1974, I think it's September of 74, the person that was really seen to be the heir to the throne of Ethiopia, the one prince that was expected to rise to that type of authority. And so when that happened, so what happened was that there was a Soviet-sponsored revolution, which completely turned the world around for us. So we were suddenly living a very difficult life, where my sister was being and her husband were being hunted down by the Soviet Union and their stooges, and life became very uncomfortable. It became a life of fear, of having to distrust people and not knowing who they were really and whether they were out to get us. All at the same time, Ethiopia was going through a period of cultural revolution. So anybody that had an education was, shot at gunpoint, and it was terrible. It's called the Red Terror period. So again, I grew up in that sort of atmosphere, which we lived in a very palpable way, because although we were living in Rome, in Italy, the world wasn't, Ethiopia wasn't far away enough. We really felt very close to the whole thing. We had relatives that were being arrested and executed, and so and I was like 5, 6, 7, and then eventually 8. I mean, I went into the Red Terror era, which was in the 80s, so I was more than 10 years old. And as the only sort of the little kid, the next generation, I had a lot of pressure on me, and people said, Carlo, one day you'll fix it. When you grow up, you really need to fix it. As you grow up, you're gonna put Ethiopia back to where it was, or you're gonna create some sort of social justice again and enable the country to thrive. And so that was a lot of that was quite a lot of weight for a little kid. And so, but I grew up with that sense of responsibility, and I thought, well, one day, I really want to do that, because of course at the same time, this is now maybe 1985, you were seeing all the pictures come on the news of the people starving to death and all that. And then eventually Bob Geldof came up with the idea of the Live Aid show that was really quite revolutionary. And I was incredibly inspired by that. On the one hand, I was torn to pieces inside by the empathy towards the sheer, tragic poverty. And on the other hand, I was inspired by Bob's incredible action. And I thought, yes, you can affect and change. Anybody that really wants to can do something important. And so that was, I think, if you talk about inflection points, that time was the defining inflection point in me. And that was a time that I decided I would give it my all and follow my heart, but give it absolutely my all. I joined the United Nations as a volunteer when I was going to school in Geneva, Switzerland. At the age of 16, 17, I was the little gopher for the chief of the anti-apartheid section of the United Nations, which was the big thing at the time, of course. And I was very sensitive also to the apartheid problem, which I felt was totally unjust. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the whole United Nations world. By then, both of my sisters had actually become refugees. My eldest was an American refugee with an American passport and was actually taken care of largely by the CIA in her escape from all these terrible things that were happening in Ethiopia. And my middle sister became an Italian citizen as a refugee eventually. And so that's my background. I was lucky for me because my dad was Italian. I was born Italian. I never had to worry about changing passport or being a refugee. But everybody around me really suffered it in a very big way. I can carry on because although that was my first, let's say, massive point of inflection where I decided I would do something no matter what. As I grew up, I thought, well, I cannot afford to take on a regular job. I cannot afford to be working in a regular 9 to 5. In order to affect change and affect political change and affect social justice and have social impact in one or more countries, I need to conquer a position in society in some ways. I need to develop my wherewithal to be able to have engagement and impact where it really matters. And so after my degree was done, I read information systems engineering in the UK. I thought, I'm going to give it my shot and be an entrepreneur. And I was at the tender age of 22, 23. I set up my first business. And I've never looked back, really. I've never been really in a situation where I was employed by somebody else. And sure enough, that did give me opportunities. It gave me opportunities to grow, to grow professionally, grow from a managerial perspective, eventually sell the company. And then I went back to Ethiopia for the first time in my early 30s. For the first time, because of course I was as a boy, I lived in Italy and in Switzerland, and my family was banned. We were exiled. We couldn't go to Ethiopia at the risk of death or imprisonment, and so I had to wait for governments to change. And right at the time after Glasnost, after the fall of the Soviet Union, that's the time that marked massive change in Ethiopia. And so anyway, after that, I thought, okay, I will be able to go back. After my degree, after selling my company, I thought, well, now I can go back and do something. And so I did go back, and my thought was, I'm going to change the world, let's say, insofar as at least Ethiopia and other countries in lesser developed economies, by doing what I do best, which is entrepreneurship. I thought to myself, well, I'm not a doctor. I can't help on that front. But what I can do is to show people how they can actually believe in themselves in order to have the vision, the strength, the courage, and the confidence that they too can have a dream, that they're allowed to have a dream, and they can actually, with a little bit of confidence and support, start to realize and join the dots towards entrepreneurship. And sure enough, I built what I called a factory of companies. It was essentially like an incubator for startups. And my dream there was, because there was quite a lot of at that point there was quite a lot of help that was going into countries like Ethiopia. It was the beginning of the microfinance movement, and but there was this idea that they're poor, really poor people in Africa. Let's help them with their basket weaving, and let's buy some baskets. And I thought, no, just because they're in Ethiopia or in a lesser developed country, it doesn't mean that they're limited to weaving baskets. These people are as smart and as capable as any of us in the wealthy countries. They just haven't had the exposure. So I thought the first thing I did was open their eyes and connect them to the world, make them realize what the global economy looks like, connect them into LinkedIn, connect them into social media, connect them into whatever mattered, create friends across the border. So my program that I established at our nonprofit, it was called Alchemy World. Alchemy as in turning lesser precious metal into gold, right? That was the big idea. The idea there was let's make sure that people are comfortable with their English language, spoken and written, and let's make sure that they understand the power of a digitally interconnected world, and let's give them some foundations in business. But that was almost an afterthought, because what I really realized that the most important thing was that inner confidence that came from being allowed to have a vision. So that was the biggest problem, is that these poorer people from villages in the rural countrysides really felt that it wasn't their status to have a dream, right? So this, I guess, were the inflection points, and that's kind of really what defined my career path, and my growth, and why I decided to become an entrepreneur. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating. In your family experienced just a lot of hardship, and that hardship is one of the driving forces of seeing that hardship and thinking that you could make some kind of difference, right? And then you get into entrepreneurship because you realize that that's a way of having, driving economies, but also it allows you to command where you want to take that direction. You set up an incubator as well, where you're enabling other entrepreneurs. And early on, you're also involved in volunteering with the UN. So I can see these different segments of your life,
Yeah.
Driving all of the things that you're doing now. So here you are, you got this educational background in information systems, you got this entrepreneurship background, this incubation background, working with the UN as a volunteer. And then where did you go from there? Like, what was like, and let's sort of go in chronological order. What did you do next?
Yeah. So, well, that's that at that point, my period, let's say, relating to some people call it giving back. For me, it was different. It was like a real deep mission of transforming Ethiopia. And I want to start with Ethiopia and end with and have a worldwide impact, really. And I was ambitious in that way. My impact in Ethiopia was sizable, as in I created in the end something like 11 incubators across the countries, and placed them in strategically in the place where nobody else would want to go, right? And that had a lot of impact. And we must have taken tens of thousands of people out of abject poverty, created, probably companies in the low thousands, So we really had an impact in creating an SMB segment. At that point, I was noticed by the World Economic Forum and invited to participate as a special constituent member representing my NGO. And formerly, by the way, when I sold my company was a tech consulting firm. So that's what enabled me. That sale is what enabled me to go to Ethiopia and spend all of my money doing this kind of work. So at the same time as the World Economic Forum, the United Nations was noticing what I was doing, and they started to ask me about to be a speaker. How the relationship carried on building up, and they said, Carlo, would you be kind enough to come and speak about how technology innovation affects the emerging economies? That was kind of my theme. I did a number of those for ITU. I did a number of those for different other parts of the UN with an audience that included UNDP and UNIDO. So many of these agencies took on a little project for ILO. And I started becoming part of that United Nations family, as it were. At the same time, what was a huge opportunity was the World Economic Forum, where at the World Economic Forum you start meeting heads of state, prime ministers, presidents from all the countries in the world, and as well as CEOs of massive organizations like KPMG and all of these things. And I thought, wow, I thought to myself, wow, everybody here, whether they're president or prime minister or the chairman of one of the biggest consulting firms, they're all really actually nice people, approachable, who you can have a conversation with. And even though I'm a nobody, they'll listen. They're kind enough to have a dialogue. And so I thought, this is really, that was an eye opener. And I thought, and suddenly I thought, yeah, we can have a conversation together. And the amount of dinners that you have and lunches and breakfasts and coffees at a conference like the World Economic Forum is, like in any other conference, you have time and you do talk. And I thought, there's something, private-public partnerships. That's something that can really, really work. I had seen it work in Ethiopia, and I saw it being implemented in bigger, grander ways through the World Economic Forum. And so I thought, yeah, here's a chance to learn something and to bring it back and apply it in other situations. So I took that lesson back with me. And by the way, in terms of influence and inflection points you mentioned earlier, I forgot to mention, but when I was a young man, one of the first big inflection points that gave me the confidence that I could do it was meeting the Secretary General of the United Nations in London, Boutros Ghali, who I met when I was I must have been 25, something like that, so young. And I had a nice long afternoon tea. We sat together for hours. I told him about my dreams and my ambitions and my, what I really wanted to do. And he encouraged me. He gave me some direction. And I thought, wow, how phenomenal. And then eventually I got to know Kofi Annan quite well, because Kofi Annan was actually a family friend, because we worked, before becoming Secretary General, he worked for FAO, I think, in Rome. And he used to call in the house and visit us. And I never knew him because I was a little boy. I mean, I knew him a little bit, but he was more of a friend of my big sister. And when I saw him again at the World Economic Forum, again, it was an influence and a validation that I wasn't barking up the wrong tree, that my idea of kind of resolving world poverty through innovative technologies and the proper sort of interconnectedness, digital interconnectedness, was really the way forward. So having left the World Economic Forum after these 10 years of really intense interaction, and after having left Ethiopia at that point, because Ethiopia was going through one of those rocky election moments, I thought, let me go and recreate the same kind of business that I did before in terms of tech consulting, And let me focus that really on the high growth areas, which were data center, AI, and cybersecurity. AI wasn't as big a thing 12 years ago as it is now, of course, but I could sense that it was coming. And I was originally an AI engineer in my youth. And so when I got to the States, I thought, let me do that. And let me do that from the United States, because that is the kind of very much a nerve center for technology. And I moved to Silicon Valley purposely because, you hear so much about it. And so I kind of went to where I felt was what I felt was the center of the tech and innovation universe. And I wasn't wrong. It was mind blowing arriving in Silicon Valley and realizing, driving through these campuses that go on for miles, like the Cisco campus and so on. I thought, okay, I'm in the right place here. Let me see what we can do. Ultimately, I'll tell you what my dream is. My dream is to bring together a lot of these technology companies in a similar way to how Bob Geldof, brought together phenomenal bands to change the world from a music, with music as a foundation. I think that we're at a point right now where corporations are becoming even more powerful than governments in terms of their financial capabilities, in terms of their vision, in terms of the complexity and the sophistication of their vision of what it means to have a stable world order. I think that it is possible to bring together the titans of our industry and to do more than corporate social responsibility, but to really take on a mission, a concerted effort, orchestrated mission that would imply, which is what's happening with the SDGs to an extent, but I want to level it up to a level where it's not having a department or division that does what's right for the world, but actually making it such a central part of the ethos of every company. That's kind of what's in my heart. So when I arrived in California, it was 14 years ago now, set up my new company. I bought my old company back because it was possible at that point. The management that took it from me, that bought it from me, didn't do an exceptionally good job, and so therefore the value was it was all there to be taken. And so Gorilla started off with a bang, and a group, and became an international company with phenomenal strength and connections. And at that point, I felt, you know what? Let's now that I've got some gray hairs in my head, and I've gone through these experiences of running my first company, selling it, then building up a nonprofit, having the level of success that we had with a nonprofit, then moving on. Let's now start to do what I think is really important. And I thought, let's see if we can create like a micro version of the World Economic Forum, but really highly focused on cybersecurity and AI. And so I created a California nonprofit, and called the Tortora Brayda Institute. My PR leader at the time said, name it after yourself. I thought, wow, that's super. I could never do that. It's not my character. She said, just trust me. But nobody can. Yeah, I said to her, look, nobody can say it. I can't even say it myself. My last name is so complicated. She said, trust me. Trust me, it's gonna be good. And so I went with it. Anyway, our what was a very modest idea of a 501c3 turned out to be extremely powerful. And a lot of very important people from the US government, from the agencies, started joining. And it just grew kind of really by itself. It kind of filled in a gap. I believe that sometimes it's the entrepreneur that creates a miracle by just sheer sweat, blood, and tears. And other times, when you tune into that something, that kind of Akashic record suggestion, things start happening by themselves. And sure enough, with the Institute, it just started coming together kind of by itself, and it's organically started building up kind of by itself. Of course, I was driving it. Of course, I was furnishing ideas. Of course, I put some corporate governance behind it and everything else. But where I'm at now is really that I lead this institute, which has become very influential, and I think appreciated and respected within the U.S. government, within NATO, within individual other European countries, and within a lot of corporations that are really enjoying the activities that we do and working with us. So I have colleagues from Intel, colleagues from Microsoft, from AWS, from Cisco, and the beauty is a lot of the people that come into a think tank, which is what we are, an institute, which is a think tank, come in really because they want to have that space to dream. Now, unlike the villages in remote Ethiopia, they already have the vision in terms of they are part of that globally interconnected world. So now they just want to be able to enact change, right? So they're more mature because they come from a sort of a stronger background. And so suddenly now I'm working with about 450 people in the Institute, all of whom are really game changers, world changers. And we're taking on projects that are of national security importance, such as, how do we strengthen the United States and its allies' critical infrastructure, cybersecurity posture? That's one of the big ones that we're doing right now. The other one is how do we prepare the world to withstand quantum computing cyber attacks, which is something that will start happening, already from next year onwards. The third is the AI and Sustainability Task Force, which is how do we create a world that is that has responsible AI really as at the center of its ethos, and how do we get that alignment into AI for good, into these Sustainable Development Goals. So there we have a very tight collaboration with AI for Good. And right now, we're actually exploring creating a global AI for Good at the high school level, which is pretty exciting. And so, yeah, so I'm actually, having gone through this long iteration, I find myself in a very happy position whereby my dreams have not been eradicated at all. I've been able to do a test run of implementing my dreams when I was a younger person in Ethiopia after selling my first business. I then had validation that those dreams were indeed possible, that not just the dreams of my entrepreneurs, but my own dreams of being able to do something really worthwhile with my life. And they were being validated by people at the WEF, people that were presidents and prime ministers and Kofi Annan and everybody else said, this is fantastic, believe in yourself. And then when we created the 501c3 in California, suddenly I start hearing that, the cybersecurity advisor at the White House is really impressed and really happy. And somebody really senior from Homeland Security says, Carlo, we really applaud your efforts. What we needed was a round table to have a better engagement with the innovators in Silicon Valley and the technology sector. Because what I saw was beforehand was that only the big guys were brought to the table with the government. It was Cisco, Google, Microsoft, AWS, those guys, right? My idea was, look, there's so much innovation. Just start to look at the smaller companies, what they're inventing. It's just unbelievable. And in America, such a vibrant innovation community. Let's harness that and create this roundtable and strategize together with the people that really matter, which are the companies that will become big companies in 20, 30 years. Let's work with everybody. And so, yeah, the American government said, yeah, fantastic. We're supporting you. And yeah, so right now, with the work that the task forces are doing, I just have to pinch myself. I don't honestly, I don't deserve any credit, because it's like, I kind of saw it build itself up, just created a platform of something that seemed to be needed. And for the rest, I'm just sitting back and pinching myself and thinking, this is wonderful. I'm doing something interesting. I'm meeting amazing people that are people that have the right kind of ethos, people that gel with my inner compass. So, sometimes you work with folks and you think, well, yeah, but that you have a different ulterior motive. Now here we don't. We're all on the same, pretty much all on the same page, and it's really very remarkable. If I have to consider myself very lucky, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different buckets here. I mean, you move back to Silicon Valley, and you have these two entities and many more that you're involved with, the Gorilla Corporation, and then you have this nonprofit institute. You have this connection with the World Economic Forum and this long-standing relationship with ITU and other UN agencies. In fact, you judge within the AI for Good program. I'm curious, you mentioned that you're now expanding the AI for Good theme into younger people. Now, AI for Good is not copyrighted to anybody, so there's different AI for Good programs out there. Are you launching that sort of under your banner of the Institute, working with the different entities, the World Economic Forum? Are you doing that in partnership with some other entity like the ITU or so on?
Yeah, so our relationship with the ITU is really tight, very warm. We really appreciate and respect each other so much, and rather I'd say I really love and respect them so much because they're the titan. We're like a little insignificant little flea in comparison. But yeah, there's a reciprocal relationship there, which is really nice. Uh, I came up with I heard about, let's say, the idea of this AI for Good Junior came this way. One of the members of my institute, who I also knew because he was a colleague at the Forbes Technology Council, told me, "Look, my daughter has a dream." I love it when a conversation starts like that. And she really believes in a society where responsible AI is really central. And I thought, it sounds interesting. He said, would you mind talking to her? And so I did. And I had this conference call with a young girl, age 12. I was blown over, Stephen. This girl she was as smart and eloquent as any panelist that you'd meet at the World Economic Forum at the United Nations, better than many of the CEOs that present at the AI for Good. I was gobsmacked. And I heard her tell me what she felt and how important this was for her. And I thought, oh my God, I had the goosebumps throughout that conversation. I thought, wow. And she said, I'd like to, this is something that is important in my school. She was based in India. And I'd like it to grow. And I thought, yeah, you're right, young lady. You are so right. This should grow into a global thing. And so at that point, I thought, okay, this can fit very well in our AI and sustainability task force at the Institute, where we have a very strong representation of significant, powerful American companies, where we have some really talented academics, et cetera, and captains of industry and all that. And I thought, let's slot it in there and get everybody here to help with this creation. Because part of what the AI for Good, our sustainability task force does is ongoing mentorship for free to the AI for Good winners and contestants. So even if they don't win the AI for Good, we support them in mentoring them and following them so that we can do whatever we can and support them also through the large corporations that we work with to ensure that they're as successful as possible in realizing their SDG compliant new organizations. Well, I thought AI for Good Junior would really fit within that. So that is something that is now driven by that task force. I've discussed it with our mutual friends at ITU, who are very excited about it. there are some things that they wish to develop in that area anyway. And so my hope is that ITU will accept to have it under their banner, because they are the flagship carrier. And I would hope that our role would be to support the process organizationally, as we currently do. So, for example, on the Innovation Factory, we represent kind of ITU's Innovation Factory in the United States, in Latin America, and as of this year in the Baltic states, where we have a lot of connections there with governments, etc., and large companies. And we're really making a big thing. We're making this into a huge venture where hundreds of talented entrepreneurs are going to be submitting applications to raise the bar of what it means to be an executive presenting at AI for Good. And so, whilst we do this on the senior contest on the Innovation Factory that you and I have served on for years, and where I had the honor to meet you in the first place, I'm also thinking that why not? Let's create this as a worldwide initiative for high schools, and plant these seeds. Because here what we're doing is not only are we planting the seeds of STEM, science, technology, in high school education and making people more interested in that, but we're also interconnecting the world. A little bit doing what I was trying to do in Ethiopia with these rural villages. So that if you growing up and you're in a high school in a rural little village in, I don't know, it might be India or even in rural America where people work very much in the farming community, and they don't necessarily mix up quite so much with the rest of the world, or even in Italy, where I'm originally from, Southern Italy, is like a world apart. And they're wonderful people. They don't really feel like they're part of a big internet-connected digital world. Well, what if we do this and suddenly it brings the world together, and suddenly it develops STEM education in schools and that drive. And suddenly it gets people thinking about, let's design AI, let's use AI because it's a revolution. And Klaus Schwab rightly saw it coming, the chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he wrote the book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is totally visionary when he wrote it a number of years ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago now. He saw it coming, and this is it. They were right in the middle of it. And so suddenly now, if high schoolers can start believing that they can shape the future, and that they can be part of this interconnected global digital world, and that their ideas are actually heard. Again, this is going back to the original dream I had, which was to be heard myself. What I've applied in Ethiopia, which is helping people that weren't heard be heard, right? Which is what we've then done with the Innovation Factory, is to give them that platform as well. Anyway, it's all coming together in a very similar way. So, to answer your question, in simple terms, yes, I wish for this to be part of the United Nations AI for Good. I'll do my darndest to work as humbly and effectively as possible for Doreen, Bilal, and of course Guillaume, who runs the initiative, and to make this a joint venture where we do a lot of the heavy lifting, because there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done on creating a global initiative like this. But we're still part of that bigger family of the United Nations.
I mean, that's a kind of a really interesting initiative, in that, but it can even run independently, right? I mean, because AI for Good, as I mentioned, isn't copyrighted to any one group or trademarked or things like that. So, there's different entities. Microsoft, for example, has an AI for Good program. There's a research institute in Montreal run by Joshua Bengio, and definitely has this kind of AI for Good. They've used the same term. So that theme has really proliferated globally, and has been sort of adopted by a number of different bodies. And working in conjunction with them is great, but also, you can run it independently as well. Have you talked to Microsoft or people like that to partner with them on their Imagine Cup program, or?
Not really. I'd love to, and if you know folks there that I could meet, I'd love to hear about it. My relationship with Microsoft is very deep, or was very deep. So when I went to create the NGO in Ethiopia, I did that in partnership with Microsoft, because what I knew was that as a single individual, out of the blue, who the hell is Carlo? It wouldn't necessarily go very far. But what I thought was important was to see what a large corporation like Microsoft would really want to get out of a CSR program. At the time, ESG was really called CSR. And so I lived in Britain, and so I went to their office at Thames Valley Park, and I invested a lot of time, and we designed it together. So we designed that NGO together. And sure enough, they were the first funders, long-term funders, that helped me to establish these first incubators across the country. So the relationship is very tight, was very tight at that time, but the partnering again, it was smooth, and it was beautiful. We were building something that was mutually, that was of real importance to the world. And so yeah, absolutely, I would so love to meet people at Microsoft that would share this kind of vision, to help with anything that the institute does in the field of in these various fields where we are very effective. For example, um, other than the AI for good, I do want to maybe save a couple of minutes when you're ready to talk to you about the big cyber initiative, because that's a mind-blowing initiative as well.
Yeah, just a few more things on the Microsoft stuff. Do you know Jean-Philippe Courtois? In fact, he just retired now from Microsoft, but still will have extensive relationships, right? He was past international president, COO, CMO, and then he was sort of part-time Microsoft and part-time working on his own initiatives. And he ended being the president of national programs globally. But he just posted that he's now retired, and he's pretty. I mean, he's great to work with. I mean, he responds, right? Do you have a relationship with him? And I mean, I would suggest you reach out to him.
Well, yeah, thank you. So I know his name. I may have come across him at one point, and might have him even potentially as a first degree connection on LinkedIn. The name really rings a bell. I mean, obviously because I know who he is, but I might have connected. But it certainly is one of those things where he wouldn't know me, and I can't really say I know him very well. I did know Steve Ballmer at the time. That's not going to help right now.
No, it's not going to help them. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend maybe reaching out. It may be definitely a great add-on to your AI for Good initiative. Giannis Ioannidis, who's the president of ACM, also within IEEE, some of the leaders there. It'd be good. Maybe the Joanne Wong, who's the chair of IEEE. Anyways, I could probably list 20. But we should leave time, as you mentioned, for your cybersecurity initiative. So let's talk about your cybersecurity initiative.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, thank you. And you know what a wonderful thing it is to go to AI for Good. I think I met the gentleman you mentioned from ACM, and we exchanged contact details at AI for Good. And what a wonderful person he is. And yes, I will be in touch. Now, the Cybersecurity Initiative, I'm excited about that. I think this is something that we're launching as a public-private partnership with initially with the United States. Phase 2 is with NATO. Phase 3 is with ITU. Phase 3 is woolly right now, but there's definitely an interest on ITU's part. So here's the thing. Right now, there is a huge amount of cyber conflict. Okay, we have already a very fragile geopolitical situation in the world.
Right.
Unfortunately, a lot of the nationalist movements are making it even more fragile. And so it is a worrying moment to live in. What most people don't see beneath the surface, there's pretty much an all-out cyber war going on,
Right.
where the two polar opposites, political polar opposites in the world, are fighting each other tooth and nail. And we in the West tend to focalize the fact that the West is being hit real hard by China and North Korea and so on and so forth, Russia and Iran. But this is also a reciprocal war, cyber war, and so let's not forget that. There's at the end of the day, it's pretty vicious, and critical infrastructure is important because it provides the capability to live for the ordinary citizen who should not be involved in a war, right? Ordinary people should not be involved in a war. Military people shouldn't either, ideally, but that's what they sign up for. But ordinary people shouldn't be affected. And here we are in a situation whereby our water treatment plants are at risk. Our energy is at risk. Our literally everything that healthcare is at risk. Operations are being delayed, but the whole thing could actually be taken down altogether. Hospitals can be taken down. The banking system can be taken down, and the fact that they're not being taken down at the moment is because people are politically they're trying to still keep a relationship of civil, tense but civil friendship. The moment that this goes just one level beyond politically, believe me, the capability to take a country down and put it on its knees is totally there. And so therefore, what we want to do is to reinforce critical infrastructure, because by so doing, at least the citizens of the world are not affected in the same way, right? Whether you're American or from another country that is far away. So the vision is currently, and I do a lot of cybersecurity analysis. What I see when I look at a hospital, any hospital virtually, what I see when I look at a water treatment plant, what I see when I look at an oil pipeline, I see a lot of cybersecurity holes, massive ones. I see a lot of ignorance in these companies in terms of of unaware, just being unaware that A, they're being targeted, B, they could be taken down at any point in time whenever whenever the adversaries wish. They're not aware of all that. So what we've done is that we said, let's be as bold, let's be bold and resolute, right? Because governments, they write these federal strategies and they say, well, we ought to take care of critical infrastructure. That's very good. And then we ought to do some awareness campaigns. Oh, that's very good. But at the end of the day, look at it right now. You go and talk to a water treatment plant manager, he hasn't got a clue. You go and talk to the head of technology at a hospital, they don't necessarily have the tools to be able to know how fragile they truly are, right? So what we developed is a program called Cyber Eagle. And what Cyber Eagle does is that it levels up cybersecurity internationally. We're going to start off with the United States. We're going to phase it out to NATO, and then we're going to collaborate with ITU as far as ITU deems it necessary. On the first part, on the first two parts, we've identified 1 million companies in critical infrastructure and 30 million people in total. These are on average 30 technology leaders per company on average. Okay, this includes, for example, companies that people don't regard as critical infrastructure, but we do, I do, right? For example, an ethanol manufacturer in Sacramento with 120 employees. Nobody really cares about them, and nobody says, oh, these are critical. They are critical, because if suddenly Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson's and all those other big mammoths get taken down, who's going to provide alcohol to the hospital in Sacramento, for example, to carry out their operations? They are critical, right? Chemicals is critical for that particular reason as well. So when you look at it in this way, there's a million companies, there's 30 million people. We are developing a general AI chatbot that will be in a position to provide a essentially a non-invasive scan to these 1 million companies overnight and say, here are your vulnerabilities. Take a look. Nobody's showed you this before, but these are your vulnerabilities. This is also how people are thinking about you on the dark web. There are these hacktivist groups that want to take you down. There are credentials of yours that are for sale on the dark web. Did you know that? These are the passwords that are being utilized by cyber criminals. Did you know that? And then they can come in and have a deeper evaluation, and they can say, okay, your network security really scores, it scores 5 out of 10. That's not good enough, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So by doing so, we make them aware, and then we give them an opportunity to work with an ecosystem that we've chosen, highly curated ecosystem of about 40 to 50 vendors and maybe 1,000 to 2,000 MSSPs, through which they can actually level up their cybersecurity. And we'll offer them like a gold, silver, bronze levels of improvements, and they will buy what they can afford. And here's the clincher. We are working very hard with the US government and other governments to get the governments to support the expenditure of cybersecurity posture improvement. So my dream is that this is something that would be articulated through like, for example, an SBA forgivable loan, just like most American companies had during the COVID period. There, it wasn't computer viruses, it was a coronavirus virus, right? And all the companies had forgivable loans made available in order to preserve employment. Right now, we're looking at a different crisis, a crisis that is actually potentially even more lethal and more nefarious. And so what we're doing is that we're saying to the governments, take a chunk of money, provide it to the SBA, and enable companies to borrow the money, improve the cybersecurity, show you proof that it's been done, and then forgive that loan. And we've been working on this theme for a couple of years in the US and elsewhere. We've got very positive feedback. We're in perfect alignment with the will of the US government. We're very much in alignment with the wills of other European governments that we've been speaking to. And so I believe that this will happen. And so there will be a point, maybe if it all goes to plan, on April 30th of 2025, where somebody at this company, which is coming out of our think tank, it's called Cyber Eagle, will flick a switch, and overnight, and I'm exaggerating for a dramatic effect right now, we might phase it out over weeks, yeah. But overnight, somebody will flick the switch, and then 30 million people will have an analysis of their vulnerabilities and an easy way for them to level it up. And if they're eligible because they can't afford it, they can have government support to buy the stuff. And that is the only program in the world that is able to reinforce critical infrastructure within an 18-month period from today.
I mean, and just a fascinating program. And I mean, I can see a lot of different entities interested in participating and partnering with you or getting involved. Unfortunately, we could probably spend an hour just on that a cybersecurity entity and then different ways to scale this program. Unfortunately, we're at the end of the interview, but that's a great way to end. Do you have one final, it's got to be under a minute, sort of comment or recommendation that you want to make to the audience?
I think yes, I do, and I'd love to share this thought that we often think what we want to do with our lives, and I think what haunts everybody is when I'm on my deathbed and I look back, what's going to run through my mind, and I think that there's an opportunity for each and every one of us to really do something remarkable. And doing something remarkable, the only legacy that stands and that stays in your heart when you're about to die is what you've done as a service for the world. And so I just like to encourage everybody to give it some thought. Look at who you are really deep down. Strip away the ego layers. yes, you're a CEO. Take it away. Forget about it. You're not. What's under the CEO level? I'm a dad. Okay, well, strip that away too, because that's full of connotation. I'm a husband. Okay, but deep down, who are you? What is the real you? And what does that real you really want out of this experience of being on the planet? And when you go through that level of introspection, you realize that service is really what matters. And so I would encourage everybody to focus on that, and hold hands with everybody else, and let's make this world a better place by being true to our inner compass, which I believe everybody wants. Everybody wants to be that person or in that spirit. So yeah, that'd just be my wish for everybody, is to start thinking a little bit more that way.
So thank you again, Carlo. And you're definitely a model. I, encourage everybody to look at your profile and the different aspects that you've got in your profile. I don't believe the one you supplied to us has Cyber Eagle in there. So
No,
maybe you should update that profile with a link to Cyber Eagle
I will.
in there. And again, thank you for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Stephen. This has been a great honor for me to be on this interview with you. Many, many thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.